Thank you, Ashley, very much. Can everyone hear me okay in the back? Okay, I wasn't going to use the microphone, but I think I will. So if you can't hear me, just yell, okay? Okay, so thank you all again for coming this evening. I'm really excited to speak to you about some of my work, and also, if anyone is interested or has questions, to talk about some of the career opportunities and career paths that are available, particularly in biomedical sciences and biology. So just to give you a brief background about what I do. So for a long time, I've been really interested in creepy crawly things. So I'm going to try to keep the creepy crawliness to a minimum and not gross anybody out. But ever since I was a kid, I was really interested in how things work biologically, and particularly in some of the things that are most threatening to us, which is other organisms that invade our body and infect us. So things like bacteria, viruses, and my favorite, parasites. And really where my interests have led me is not necessarily to studying those bugs themselves, but rather to studying how your body and the bodies of other mammals, like dogs, for example, react to being infected. So how do we protect ourselves during infection? And that leads us to talk about the immune system, which would be our major topic of discussion here this evening. And I think this is really fascinating to think about how the human body has evolved with parasites and other pathogens to fight them off, and also sometimes, when needed, to live peacefully with them. So, again, I will keep the creepy crawliness to a minimum and hopefully introduce you to some of the really exciting aspects of host pathogen interactions that I study in my lab. And I would like to say right up front, if anyone has a question, please ask. Feel free to interrupt. I would love to have discussions or hear comments. Don't be afraid, don't be shy. Okay, so my title, I think, probably leads you to ask a couple of questions. So first of all, we're talking about parasites. So this is a picture of a parasite. This is the business end, the mouth that feeds. And as you can see, I mean, this is obviously a blown-up picture. This guy is much smaller in real life, but this is really terrible looking, right? So this is the sort of thing that lives inside of you. So there's this horrifying thing, but in my title I'm also talking about allergies. And so what do allergies have to do with parasites? So let's take a little step back and talk about some of the basics of parasite infection and also allergic disease. And hopefully in a couple of minutes you'll all see sort of where these two topics intersect. So this is a sort of representation of the wonderful and wild world of parasites. And so these are all different organisms that must live inside of another organism in order to survive and reproduce. They cannot, for long periods of time, live on their own. And that's what defines parasitism. I'm sure many of you have talked about that concept and that definition in your biology classes. But what's really amazing is that all of these organisms have that in common. They need to live either on or in another organism. But you can immediately appreciate how diverse they are. And so there are single-celled parasites, for example, Toxoplasma, Trypanosoma, Leishmania. And then there are also the parasitic worms that are just as complex as you or I. For example, tapeworms, here, schistosomes, the flukes, trichinella, ascaris, other types of worms. And so, and then of course not to leave out our favorite, the ectoparasites, the ticks that carry Lyme disease. So this is a huge diversity of different sort of lifestyles and body types and cellular morphologies, but all of these animals have developed the same thing in common, which is that they need to live inside you or another mammalian host in order to survive. And so my work currently focuses on the helminth parasites. And the word helminth just means worm. And so helminths are a class of complex multicellular parasites. So as I mentioned, they're just as complex as you or I. And these, because of their complexity, when they infect a human or another mammal, they pose some really significant challenges to the host. And one challenge I'd like to point out is depicted nicely here. So this is a ruler. And so you can appreciate by looking at the size of this worm compared to the ruler that that guy's actually really big. So these are large organisms that are living inside you, living inside children, living inside animals. And so that's a huge organism for your body to fight off. It's not like a little, microscopic bacteria. It's a real challenge, I think, just in its physical scale. In addition, like I mentioned, these organisms are just as different as you or I are from them. And so Trichinella is as divergent from, for example, the tapeworms as we are from a tapeworm. They're hugely divergent on an evolutionary scale. And they have very different life cycles and sort of do different things. And so that poses another challenge. And so I find this really fascinating. How does the mammalian host deal with being infected and infested with organisms of this size and complexity? And so enter the immune system. And so for those of you who have not had much immunology or who have forgotten immunology from days past, I'll just go through a few sort of definition and housekeeping things related to what the immune system is and does. And so I think in everybody's general knowledge, we know that the immune system protects us when we get sick. And, that is true. However, I think it's important to think about the immune system in a slightly different way, in particular as we think about these helminth parasites and the connection to allergies that we're coming to. So the immune system is really amazing. It's a complex collection of tissues and cells that are distributed throughout the body. So unlike, for example, your liver, which sits in one spot and it's a single organ, the immune system goes everywhere. It is everywhere. So single immune cells travel throughout the blood, the lymph, and the organs of the body to survey and protect you. And so in that, it's actually quite amazing in that it can go and see everything inside of your body. And so this brings up the question, with this ability, what truly is the immune system function? Is it indeed around to protect us from pathogens? And actually, the answer turns out to be no. The immune system's true function is to recognize stuff as you or not you. So as an immune cell is circulating through the body and it sees, for example, that liver cell and it says, this is me, cool. Then it circles around a little more and it goes into your toe and it says, toenail, that's you, that's fine. Then it circles around and finds, for example, some staph on your skin. And it says, whoa, this is not me. This needs to go. And then that immune cell and other cells in the surrounding area will initiate this whole cascade to fight off that invader. And so what the immune system really is and does is a surveillance system that has the ability to recognize whether something is part of you or not. And if it recognizes something as not part of you that could harm you, then it tries to either attack it, eliminate it, or wall it off in some way. And so this ability then to destroy the foreigner, the invader, the infection, is what we sort of, at a community level, think about in terms of the immune system's function. It's there to destroy pathogens. But the real basis of that is the immune system's ability to distinguish things that are foreign invaders. And so this function then confers both the ability to fight off foreign invaders and some other kind of collateral damages. And so how does the immune system fight off invaders? So inflammation is a word that we talk about a lot in immunology. And so what exactly is inflammation? Inflammation is something that you might hear about on TV or talk about in your, but it's sort of a broad term. And so when we talk about inflammation, we're talking about sort of swelling, pain, heat, redness, sort of these gross morphological signs and symptoms, if you will. But the molecular basis and why your tissue gets inflamed, for example, red, painful, and swollen when you have a skin infection, like this person and their foot, is that the immune cells are there and they're fighting invaders. And so what are they doing? So immune cells, when they find an invader, home to the site where they think the foreign enemy is. They also produce a wide array of different proteins and biochemical molecules, many of which are pretty potent toxins. So there are many immune responses that are actually quite dangerous for the host, for yourself, not just to kill the invader, but all of the toxins that are produced are actually quite deleterious. In addition, as part of this redness and swelling, your vasculature, your blood vessels, and the blood flow in the area changes. That's why skin gets red and swollen, because more blood is coming into the area. And so the immune cells are helping to direct these changes. And so what does this result in? Well, an environment that's not very hospitable for the invader, for the bacteria, parasite, or virus, or fungus. It can also lead to pathogens being isolated. So in the case of tuberculosis, for example, your immune system doesn't bother trying to kill tuberculosis. What it does is build a wall around it so that it can't harm you anymore. It stays within your lungs, but the immune system's idea is just to sort of wall it off. And then alternatively, sort of the most obvious, is your immune cells then kill the pathogen or kill whatever it perceives as foreign. And so this all brings up a question. If the main function of the immune system is to designate you versus not you, and foreign invaders, can it make a mistake? Can it accidentally identify something as you, which is in fact not, or vice versa, look at something which is not you and make the wrong call? And so, indeed, the answer is yes. So in the context of allergic disease, what happens is your immune system is circulating through your body and it sees a bit of peanut and it says, whoa, we've got to get this thing. This is terrible. Peanut is not harmful. It's not part of you, but it's not harmful. It's a sort of normally innocuous environmental or food exposure. Same thing with pollen. And so the immune system is mistakenly recognizing something which is indeed not you, but which really isn't harmful. Peanut's not going to infect you and make you sneeze. Pollen is not, going to rip through your tissues or destroy your internal organs. So allergies occur when your immune system makes a mistake. Likewise, autoimmune diseases are the result of your immune system making a mistake. They see part of you. So in the case of multiple sclerosis, for example, your immune system sees the myelin that coats your nerves and protects them as a foreign body, as an invader. And it attacks it and destroys it. And that leads to the neurological symptoms associated with MS. And so this is another manifestation of the immune system making a mistake. And so what happens here is the immune system causes inflammation, just as if it had been correct and encountered a pathogen. But this inflammation is now inappropriate. There's no reason to become inflamed because of a peanut or because of your own myelin and your nerves. And so what's really interesting and something that captured my attention when I was first an early college student is the realization through some of my coursework that these diseases, allergic diseases and autoimmune diseases that are the result of our immune system making a mistake, they're really on the rise. And so I have a little graph here. So this is the incidence, or actually I think this is prevalent. So this is children, school-age children in the US that have an allergic disease. And so we can see asthma, eczema, which is allergic skin disease, and hay fever. And tracking all the way back to 1960, there's been a huge increase in the percentage of school children that have these diseases. So you'll often hear, for example, your parents say, oh gosh, when I was in school, nobody was allergic to anything. And now, we have peanut-free classrooms, et cetera. And that's in fact true. When your parents were in school, very few kids were allergic. And now many children are allergic to peanut and other allergens. And so this is certainly a group of diseases on the rise. If you graphed up autoimmune diseases the same way, this would also be true. So these diseases are also increasing. And as a side note, because I work at a vet school, another interesting feature is that these diseases are now starting to increase in our pets as well. So allergic diseases in dogs, particularly allergic skin disease, is also on the rise. And so we think about then the immune system as a powerful force. So in the context of parasitic worm infection, which affect humans, animals, etc., many different species, the immune system fights the parasite and protects the host. However, during allergic disease, the immune system is attacking something that should normally be perceived as harmless. And this causes inappropriate inflammation. And likewise, interestingly, these diseases, as I just mentioned, affect humans and also dogs and cats. And so I think it's really important to study the immune system in this context. Because these diseases affect a lot of people, billions of people, in fact, suffer collectively from either allergic disease or helminth infection. And also these diseases cause real morbidity. So not many people die of allergy. Some people with really terrible anaphylactic peanut allergies can die. But most people don't die of their allergic disease. Likewise, most people don't die immediately of their helminth infection in places where humans are infected. However, these diseases cause really, really devastating consequences. So children who are infected with parasites, they don't grow very well because something else is eating all of their nutrients inside of their bodies. They have decreased cognitive function, they have anemia, and people who grow into adulthood with heavy parasite burdens don't lead very healthy lives as adults. Allergic diseases, as many of you in this room might know, are really uncomfortable. They can be very difficult to manage, expensive to treat, and something that you never really get a handle on. I, for example, am a disgusting mess every spring when the pollen comes out. And some people have allergic diseases that really impact their quality of life to an extreme degree. Okay, and so now, how are then parasites and allergies or autoimmune diseases really related sort of on a very sciencey molecular cellular level? So we just talked about how your immune system protects you against the helminth, and then when it makes a mistake, then you get allergies or autoimmune disease. But it's kind of interesting, these diseases are on the rise, right? Allergies and autoimmune disease. So why exactly is that? And is there any relationship to helminth infection? So some of you may have heard of the hygiene hypothesis. And the hygiene hypothesis basically says, here in the US and in other industrialized nations, as humans, we're no longer parasitized very often. Most of you in this room do not have a hookworm infection, for example. Interestingly, almost all of you have had pinworm at some point, but you never noticed that. So we are still helminth infected to a certain degree. But for the most part, most people in this room are not helminth infected. And the places geographically on the globe where helminth infections have declined because of great hygiene and access to clean food and water, those are the places where allergic diseases and autoimmune diseases have really increased. So, for example, here in the US, we have low parasite loads and high burdens of allergy and autoimmune disease. In places like sub-Saharan Africa, where almost everybody is still parasitized by helminths, they have very low levels of allergies and autoimmune diseases. And so I have a couple of graphs or maps to illustrate that. So this is the global prevalence of asthma. Red is a lot, blue is not much, white is no data. But you can immediately see that places that are industrialized and have fairly good sanitation, Canada, the US, Australia, places in Brazil and also in Europe, there's a lot of asthma. Then when you layer that over a map of the prevalence of helminth infection, you can see that everything reverses. And so helminth infection is found in places like Africa, Southeast Asia, and parts of South America. And so Brazil, I like to point out, is kind of an interesting example because Brazil is a country that's very large, but it also has parts that are quite industrialized and very similar to our environment here in the US. And it also has places that are very rural and very resource poor. And so it's kind of a mix of both of these two environments. And so you can see that, lucky them, they get both asthma and helminth infection. But it's kind of interesting to look at these maps and wonder, so what is it about being clean? What is it about lacking helminth infection that makes us more susceptible to having our immune systems make these molecular mistakes and giving us allergies or autoimmune diseases? And so what the hygiene hypothesis states, which this is kind of an old idea, this came out in the late 80s, is that natural exposure to pathogens, particularly helminth parasites, leads to the proper development of our immune system. So we've evolved with parasites, and our immune system kind of needs them now in order to know how to function properly. And so in the absence of these stimuli, so for example, when we become too clean, or we have great sanitation and we're fortunate enough not to be helminth infected, then our immune system doesn't really know what to do. It's kind of bored. So it inappropriately reacts to yourself, you, causing autoimmune disease, and it inappropriately reacts to environmental substances that aren't you, but should be designated as harmless. And so how does this occur? What are the factors that might train your immune system as you grow in order to make these decisions correctly? And so one thing, sort of a basic piece of immunology that you need to understand the next slide, is that the immune system is really smart. It's smarter even than a yes, this is me, no, that's not me. Once it designates something as a foreign invader, it classifies it. And so it says, I know you're a bacteria, I know you're a virus, I know you're a worm, and even down to a very fine molecular level. And then your immune system directs a response that's very tailored to killing that particular pathogen. So, for example, for a bacteria, your immune system is going to do things that immediately directly kill that tiny little organism. Bacteria replicate very fast, so your immune system also mounts a very robust, fast response. For a parasitic worm, on the other hand, one of those big, huge worms, a little tiny cell of the immune system is not going to be able to do anything next to that giant worm. And so what your immune system does in that context is very different. Rather than directly attacking the worm, the cells of your immune system rather help to make the environment very inhospitable, so the worm can't live there anymore and decides to go away. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But just to give you some immunology jargon, and so when the immune system senses that you are infected with bacteria, viruses, or fungi, sort of small things, the immune system mounts what we call a type 1 or a type 17 response. And so these are some of the immune cells that are key players in this context. And you don't need to remember any of these guys, except to say they also, all of these different immune cell types that travel through your body, produce an array of very specific toxins and sort of communication messengers that help to tell the rest of the body what's going on. Say, whoa, we're infected with the bacteria, we need to do antibacterial things. So again, in contrast, during helminth infection, your immune system mounts a type 2 response. And a type 2 response is, as I just mentioned, not a direct parasite killing mechanism, but a mechanism by which to change the tissue where the parasite lives in order to make it inhospitable. And so interestingly, that type of response is also exactly the same type of response that occurs during allergic disease. So what that means is that when your immune system becomes allergic, it's treating the allergen just like it would treat a worm. So why is that? And I do apologize for the type 1, 2, and 17. This really, should be free 1, 2, and 3. It makes sense. This is something that immunologists love to do, is confuse people with numbers and acronyms. So if there's anything that's confusing, please let me know. So then to delve in a little bit deeper into what this type 2 response is, I'm going to show you a little cartoon that sort of illustrates what happens when you become infected with a helminth parasite, or when your immune system sees an allergen and begins to respond inappropriately. Okay, so these are epithelial cells. So these are the cells that line the inside of your intestines, the insides of your lungs, the outsides of your skin. So these are the kind of cells that interface with the environment. They line your tissues in places in your body where your body sort of meets the outside world. And so when these cells come into contact with worms or allergens, they kind of know something's up. So giant worm is thrashing around, biting you in your intestine. Your epithelial cells begin to produce danger molecules. And we call these cytokines, so epithelial cell-derived cytokines. And so these danger signals then are things that your immune cells that live in the tissue can immediately pick up on. So these are some of the early responders. We call them innate immune cells. So many of these live actually in the tissue full time, and their job is to wait until they see some of these danger signals. And so once these cells see these early danger signals, then that gives them the signal to sort of mobilize the troops. So these are sort of the scouts, if you will. So these cells then go throughout the body, for example, to the lymph nodes and spleen, and find other immune cells. And we call these adaptive immune cells. And so these are the immune cells that can remember things specifically. This is the basis of why we vaccinate, because we have cells in our body that can remember long-term the pathogens they've seen. And so these early responders go and tell these guys that can remember, they say, whoa, we're infected with a worm. These guys begin to respond, and together, these early responders and also these cells where the memory resides begin to produce large amounts of these toxins and cellular messengers. And we call these type 2 cytokines. So this is why it's the type 2 response, because we're producing type 2 cytokines. And cytokines is really just a fancy word for protein messenger. They're just proteins that these cells are making that can talk to other cell types and spread the message. And so what happens next is not, these immune cells do not go up to the worm and start, like lobbing toxins at them, for the most part. Some of them try, some of them do. But the primary function of this response is that the epithelial cells themselves are also sensitive to these cytokines, these messengers that the immune cells are producing. And when they see these type 2 cytokines, a certain cascade of things happens. So these epithelial cells start to produce a lot of mucus. They start to turn over very quickly, so the tissue becomes altered in its physiology. Smooth muscle cells also respond here, and so the contractility of the smooth muscles in the tissue changes. And if you think about it, these are sort of all the things that are the signs and symptoms of allergy. So mucus, runny nose, smooth muscle contractility, asthma attack, wheezing. These are the changes that are really driving these symptoms. And so in the context of helminth infection, these things are good. So they make your intestine, for example, a mucousy, slippery, watery, gross place that the worm is like, I'm out of here. And so by achieving sort of these changes to the tissue, it renders the tissue a really inhospitable place for the worm. When this is an allergen and not a helminth, this renders a really inhospitable environment for you as you're walking down the hallway, like sneezing and blowing your nose. So this is really unique, actually. Your body doesn't do this in response to a bacterial infection or a viral infection. It's a really unique approach to trying to protect yourself from these helminth parasites. And so the fact remains, like, why on earth does your body sort of think about allergens the same way that it does as helmets. So there's some evidence that on a molecular level, so looking at the actual sort of molecules in biochemistry, many allergens have a lot of similarities to some helminth-derived products. So that's one idea, that your immune system just can't tell the difference between these things that look quite similar. But there's some other ideas about how the human immune system has developed and works with helminth invaders that I think maybe shed some light on this. And so the first thing to talk about is these guys, T regulatory cells. And so if you think about this whole response, it's got to shut down at a certain point, right? So once the worm is gone, you don't want to keep having all of these signs and symptoms forever. T regulatory cells are the brakes. So once the worms are gone, or almost gone, these cells really turn on, shut off these other responses, and bring things back to the steady state, back to homeostasis. And so interestingly, worms have evolved these mechanisms to actually co-opt this pathway. So worms have molecules that tell these cells, yeah, put on the brakes now. I'm not gone yet, but stop. And that allows the worm to persist. And so one idea is that when you're helminth infected, the worm is constantly telling your immune system, it's okay, just stop, it's fine. Have your Tregs, stop this immune response. And so your immune response can't respond to an allergen. It's got the brakes on, right? So in that context, it's kind of interesting. Maybe that supplies a cellular mechanism of why we get allergies when we're not helminth infected, because we need the helminths to keep these brakes on so we don't become allergic to harmless things. Another idea sort of lies here. And so these early responders, they need training. As you grow as a child, they need perhaps the right signals from helminths to train them what actually is a pathogen. And if they don't have that training, then they really don't know what's what. And they call an allergen something dangerous. Another idea is this type 2 cytokine thing, and sort of the balance between type 2 cytokines and then these other, the type 1 and type 17 responses that I talked about. So we think of type 2 responses as being sort of subdued and mostly changing the environment, the tissue, whereas the type 1 and type 17 responses, I mean, these are the kind of responses that can liquefy your tissue. They're hugely inflammatory. And so in this context, maybe you need helminths to kind of keep things on an even keel, so your immune system doesn't become too inflammatory. So the Tregs are another option. And then finally, as we're thinking here then about this interplay between, we've got the epithelial cells, we've got the innate immune cells, we've got your adaptive immune cells, there's lots of stuff going on. When you're helminth infected, your immune system is busy. It's got stuff to do. When you're not helminth infected, maybe it just gets bored and starts to do some of these things in response to stuff that it normally wouldn't react to if it were busy doing its real job. Okay, so that's just kind of a text slide to describe